This is the issue, and I am the ghetto man. Today's issue, the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Don't go away. We'll be right back. The Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. If there was one subject that our founding fathers agreed upon, it was their fear of government. There is no greater danger to personal liberty and an individual's inalienable rights than the awesome force of government, any government. The most devastating crimes in history have been committed by governments, perpetuated upon good citizens in the name of law and for the security of the state. Some say government is necessary, to secure our blessings of liberty, to ensure domestic tranquility, and to provide for the common defense. But the fact is, government, any amount of it, is always a potential evil lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce upon the people to enslave them the moment they let their guard down. It is for this reason that our founding fathers created a limited central government, a union consisting of several sovereign states that delegated a small portion of their power to the federal government for their defense. The sole purpose of the federal government is to protect the people's inalienable rights from the threat of despotism and tyranny. They established a republic of sovereign states bound by a limited federal government that was strong enough to protect the sovereign states, but not so strong that it would become a tyrannical threat itself. Now, this was accomplished by creating a contract that we call the United States Constitution, which contains numerous checks and balances, strictly limiting the federal government's power to regulate the states and the people. The very core of our constitutional system of checks and balances is the Second Amendment, which reads as follows: a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed, unquote. Now, the Second Amendment didn't grant or create the right to keep and bear arms. As we've learned, the Second Amendment is nothing more than a secondary restriction placed on government that preserves the natural right to defend your inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property, and especially to defend these rights from a federal government that has usurped the sovereign power of the several states in violation of the contract, the U.S. Constitution. The intent of our founding fathers was clear as to the meaning of the Second Amendment. When you read the Federalist Papers, and the Federalist Papers are a series of articles written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison prior to the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. It is from within these articles that we find the true intent and the meaning of the articles contained in the United States Constitution. It becomes extremely clear as to what the delegates to the Constitutional Convention intended when the Second Amendment was added to the United States Constitution. Now, the Second Amendment does not simply guarantee the private ownership of firearms for personal protection of your life, liberty, and property. It guarantees the citizen much, much more than that. The Second Amendment is a call to duty to each able-bodied citizen to protect our constitutional republic from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, this right extends beyond any law created by civil government. Its primary purpose is to guarantee that the sovereign citizens of this nation have the means to protect themselves from an outlaw government. And it is to be used as a means of last resort only. The right to keep and bear arms, the right to use arms, becomes valid immediately when government refuses to obey the mandates of the contract, the U.S. Constitution, or when government attempts to disarm its citizens. This is why the Second Amendment reads, quote, being necessary to the security of a free state, unquote. The only way that the sovereign citizens of a free state can maintain their security is by private ownership and possession of firearms, and possession of firearms equivalent to that used by the Army, Navy, and the Air Force, standing ready to serve a well-organized militia in the state that they reside in. Now, the term militia means the body of citizens in a state enrolled for discipline as a military force, but not engaged in actual service except in emergencies, as distinguished from regular troops or a standing army. And that comes from Black's Law Dictionary, and that can be found on page 514. Now, don't confuse this with the National Guard. They aren't the same thing, and we'll discuss this in another video. The main purpose of the Second Amendment is to guarantee that each state shall have the means to preserve its freedom. A well-armed citizenry is the only guarantee that a state has in protecting the freedom of its citizens. Now, the meaning of the Second Amendment is clear. Here is what Alexander Hamilton said about it. Quote, if the representatives of the people betray the constituents, there is then no recourse left but in the exertion of that original right of self-defense which is paramount to all positive forms of government, and which, against the usurpations of national leaders, may be exerted with infinitely better prospects of success, unquote. The Second Amendment is the protection of the people's, quote, original right of self-defense, unquote. The written law, well, it has no force and effect when it comes to restraining a corrupt government. It is therefore the people that have the power to restrain government, and the Second Amendment's restriction on government tampering with that right is the only check held by the people that guarantees that the written law, the United States Constitution, will be enforced when our public servants turn from its mandate. Now, the Second Amendment doesn't just protect our individual right to self-defense. It guarantees our right to keep and bear arms in readiness for the common defense and public safety against a local and or a national government that has become corrupt. Well, should a person carry a gun? Oh, I do. Well, the most common and immediate threat to our lives and our property is a common criminal, right? Nothing deters crime better than having a well-trained, law-abiding citizen with a 9mm pistol strapped to his waist. And if you put that same pistol in the purses of every woman in this country, you will rid our society of muggers and rapists. Most career criminals prefer to stalk citizens that are unarmed. Why? Because as they make easy prey now, don't they? When a government restricts private ownership of firearms to law-abiding citizens, violent crime goes up. Now, that's an undisputed fact, no matter how hard the commie-crats try to spin it. So why are the Commie-crats and other anti-constitutional, anti-gun domestic enemy groups trying so hard to control our right to keep and bear arms? Is it to protect us from the bad guys on the street? No. It's simple. It's just to enslave us. The domestic enemy Commie-crats, they hate the U.S. Constitution, they hate our rights, and they hate our freedoms. And their sole purpose is to enslave us all. Now, according to George Mason, the principal composer of the Bill of Rights, quote, "To disarm the people, that was the best and most effective way to enslave them," unquote. The primary responsibility for defense of our country, of our life, liberty, and property, rests in we the people, not in our servant government. The moral duty for all law-abiding citizens is to keep and bear arms. Well, why? And that answer's simple and obvious. Because keeping and bearing arms is in the best interest of public safety. That's why. In meeting our duty for providing for the common defense, a well-trained and well-armed citizenry supplies the strongest deterrent from the violent crimes now plaguing our streets. It is also a deterrent to despotism and tyranny within our government as well, which should be, in my opinion, our greatest concern. Now, in speaking of government despotism, Alexander Hamilton said, quote, "The obstacles to usurpation and the facilities of resistance increase, provided the citizen understand their rights and are prepared to defend them." Or as Patrick Henry once said, quote, "The great object is that every man be armed," unquote. Now, on April 19, 1775, the British marched into Concord, Massachusetts. Why? They came there to seize the Americans' guns and their cannons as well. Now, as soon as the British told the patriots to lay down their arms, their God-given right to defend themselves became valid at that very moment. And the famed shot that was heard around the world was fired, now wasn't it? That shot was heard around the world. Why? Because that shot represented the birth of a new nation that revolutionized government philosophy and eventually raised the worldwide level of individual liberty to the highest point in modern history. It was George Washington that said, quote, "Government is not reason, it's not eloquence, it is force. It is a dangerous servant and a fearful master," unquote. Therefore, we must jealously guard our inalienable rights from the awesome power of government, especially the right to keep and bear arms. How else can a sovereign people defend their rights from a government gone bad? With rocks? Are you kidding me? Self-defense is a God-given or natural inalienable right. Common defense means defense of one's family, his fellow citizens, and his homeland. It is a God-given natural duty to fight for your country. And the only way that a citizen can fulfill his duty to God and his country is by keeping and bearing arms with the preparedness and a willingness to use them should it become necessary. Now, your right to use arms against government becomes valid immediately when government refuses to obey the mandates of the Constitution or when government attempts to disarm its citizens. It is a duty that must never be abandoned or surrendered to any police force, sheriff department, or military services. It is to be always retained by we the people. The first and last defense of our nation and its Constitution remains in the people's right to keep and bear arms. This is why the framers of the Second Amendment, carefully chose the words contained in the amendment. Let's read the Second Amendment one more time. Does it say what it means? And does it mean what it says? A well-regulated militia. And a militia means the armed citizenry, a well-regulated armed citizenry, being necessary to the security of a free state. And the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, can government pass laws that infringe upon your inalienable right to keep and bear arms? Well, the question is simple. It's no. No, they can't do that. And when they do, are we bound to obey those unconstitutional laws? See my video on unconstitutional law, null and void. I will place it in the comment section below. All, and I mean all gun control legislation, no matter how small it may appear, is unconstitutional. Not one branch of government has the constitutional authority to infringe on that right in any way. Period. End of story. The reason that the framers of the United States Constitution used the word right instead of duty was because the word duty would confer upon the federal government the power to enforce and regulate the keeping and bearing of arms. The framers of our Constitution wanted this right to always remain in the hands of the people, the sovereign citizens. To leave it in the hands of the federal government would surely mean that it would be legislated out of existence someday. So that right was reserved to the states respectively and to the people. And we will cover that subject when we discuss the 9th and 10th Amendments. Colonial Massachusetts, for instance, had a law requiring that its citizens be armed or face severe fines. And this was also true of colonial Virginia, where in the states required by law that every home have a working firearm and that the citizens take part in a public target practice on Sundays. Why? To maintain a strong common defense by maintaining a well-regulated militia. Now, why maintain a well-regulated militia? Because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. I don't know how much clearer that can get. A well-armed, well-trained militia made up of private citizens with officers appointed by the state can defend the state's sovereignty against any encroachment made by the federal government upon the people's rights. This is precisely what Alexander Hamilton meant by, quote, a well-regulated militia. Here is what Hamilton said, quote, little more can be reasonably aimed at with respect to the people at large than to have them properly armed and equipped. But though the scheme of disciplining the whole nation must be abandoned as mischievous or impracticable, yet it is a matter of utmost importance that a well-digested plan should, as soon as possible, be adopted for the proper establishment of the militia. This will not only lessen the call for military establishments, but if circumstances should at any time oblige the government to form an army of any magnitude, that army can never be formidable to the liberties of the people while there is a large body of citizens, little if at all inferior to the army, in discipline and the use of arms, who stand ready to defend their own rights and those of their fellow citizens. This appears to me to be the only substitute that can be devised for a standing army, and the best possible security against it, if it should exist." Unquote. Congress has passed numerous rules and regulations concerning the establishment of well-regulated militias within the several states and how they work in concert with the armed forces of the United States, all of which guarantee the right of the citizen to own a firearm that is in common use by the military of that day. Unfortunately, none of the states or the federal government honor or implement the militia laws anymore. I have done 2 videos, parts 1 and 2, on how the militia works in the United States, and we'll post them in the comments section of this video below. Now, you must remember that the federal government is not a central government designed to replace or exceed the sovereign authority of the individual states. If it were, what protection would any of the several states have against the federal government in the event that it would attempt to usurp the state's sovereignty? How could the states defend themselves from a domestic attack without a well-regulated militia? Hamilton was simply saying that we, the states, should, as much as possible, rely on ourselves, private citizens, for our own common defense against all enemies, whether the threat is from within the state, like the Communards, or from an external power, a foreign power. If the states surrender all of its power to defend within its borders to the federal government, you see, we could create a central government so powerful that we would be unable to keep it under control or resist any of its abuses. It is true that in order to protect all the sovereign states from an invasion of a foreign power, it is necessary to have a formal army for national defense, especially at our borders. But if the people of each state are armed and well-trained, the national army could never be used by corrupt public servants against the people of the several states. No one today should have to be reminded of the attack by the federal government and the use of the United States forces on the Christian community in Waco, Texas, where we all witnessed the first American Holocaust. Now, George Mason, one of the major authors of the Bill of Rights, defined a state militia as consisting, quote, of the whole people, unquote. In 1939, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the word militia, as it was used by the Founding Fathers, meant one comprised of, quote, all males physically capable of acting in concert for the common defense. And further, that ordinarily when called for service, these men were expected to appear bearing arms supplied by themselves and of the kind in common usage at the time. And this comes from a case called the United States of America versus Miller. It's a United States Supreme Court case, and it can be found in the United States Supreme Court Reports, Book 307, U.S., on page 174. You must remember that it is the intent of the lawmakers that determine what the law is, not the courts. The only thing that the courts can do is review the law and make sure that it meets constitutional mandate. The courts cannot change the intent of the framers of the law, and if they do, no one is bound by an unconstitutional order or an unconstitutional law for that matter. If the people of this nation don't regain control of their government, they will be forced to take the same action against government as did our Founding Fathers. For this reason, I say this to you, never give up your guns. Never. Now, when we elect people to public office that violate their duty, either by presenting or voting for an unconstitutional bill, as an example, the Brady Bill, then that person has committed perjury and an act of treason against the nation and its people, and it is the duty of we the people to hold them accountable for their actions. To ignore the crime makes each and every one of us an accomplice to it. See my video on Oath of Office, Know the Law, Know Your Enemy. It's posted below. We have the same duty and responsibilities as our founding fathers did, and they put a stop to government tyranny. We must start protecting our right to keep and bear arms and indict any politician that attempts to pass any legislation that limits we the people from our God-given rights to keep and bear arms in defense of a criminal government. Even the word of Yahweh, Yeshua, advised his followers to arm themselves. Quote, "And he who has no sword, let him sell his garment to buy one." Luke 22:36. It's time to buy a gun. Sell your clothing if you have to, but buy a gun. And in closing, quote, "Those who already walk submissively will say there is no cause for alarm." Laird versus Tatum, 408 U.S. 1. I am the Ghetto Man. Thank you for watching. If you're politically correct, then you're legally wrong. And if you're not part of the solution, then you are the problem.